This is exciting tonight. We have a really good turnout of over almost 40 people that are in attendance tonight. So thank you. My name's Larry McDermott. I'm the Executive Director for the Arc of Will County. We serve Will County and 6 counties east towards the Nebraska border. So if you ever want to help out, be a volunteer or anything, you know where to come. We'll use you. On behalf of the board, staff, and members of the Arc of Will County, we want to welcome everyone here tonight to tonight's training. I want to give you just a little bit of an idea about how we got here tonight. We had about 4 or 5 parents about 3 months ago sit down with us, and we were just trying to figure out, you know, how are we going to get through this COVID pandemic thing? You know, education is one of the things that we're not blaming anybody. We're just trying to figure out how can we get through this, right? And to the parents' credit, we landed on one thing. We need more communication. So lo and behold, we started reaching out to people that we know well and work well with together. And many of those people are here tonight. Jennifer Levin from Disability Law Colorado, Candace Hawkins from CDE, Colorado Department of Education, and we have 2 special ed directors from BOCES as well as District 6. We also have some other special ed personnel from a lot of other districts that are too plentiful to name tonight. But basically the message is we saw a need and we reached out, and together good things happen. And tonight that training is one of those things that occurred as a result of that talk. So as I tell staff all the time is great things happen with one idea, one small idea, and it grows. So we want to really thank everyone for being here tonight. We hope that this could be maybe one of many, if this is successful, that we want to do more of talking about how to increase communication, how to support each other. We're all in this together. We're not enemies. So I want to introduce someone very important to our agency, Michael Kelly, who will be tonight's MC, Master of Ceremonies. He is going to be charged with kind of keeping the order here, kind of keeping things, the tempo going. One of the things we want to share with you is one of the downsides of doing this is we can't answer every question of everybody. But what we do make a commitment to is we will get back to you. If we didn't get to something, we will call you offline and you can be guaranteed. And if you don't get a response, you call Letitia or myself. Our information will be on there. But Mike has been with our agency for over 6 years. He's been our board treasurer and is really a parent with a child with disability, and he knows everything about there is to know. If you don't believe him, ask him. He'll tell you. I want to hand the reins over to Mike, but thank you all for being here. This is really exciting. I want to do more of this. Mike?
Gotcha. Hey, thanks a lot, Larry. I got to live up to that now. I don't know if I'm going to keep this group on track, but I'm definitely excited to be a part of this training tonight. So thanks a lot for inviting me. Good evening, everyone. You know, this training is being recorded and will be available on the Arc of Will County website. It can also be transcribed in a variety of languages. A little bit about the presentation. We have a presentation prepared for you tonight that will be provided by Candace Hawkins of the Colorado Department of Education and Jennifer Levin of Disability Law Colorado. Throughout the duration of this training, or at least on this first part here, you guys will be muted. All right, please provide all questions via the chat box function. To do this, just go ahead and click on chat in the meeting control bar right there down there at the bottom of your screen. You just saw something pop up there. A chat window will open up on the right. All right, type in a message into that chat box, a drop down, either to or to the entire group. So if you want to send something to a specific person, go ahead and use that to function and I'll send them a direct message. Otherwise, it'll go to the entire group. It defaults on everyone. All right, following this presentation, our panelists will respond to some pre-submitted questions and chat box questions as the time permits. All right, we got a great group, good sized group tonight. Please protect the confidentiality of one another and avoid using some of that identifying information of these students when submitting those questions. For any remaining questions, again, we are going to circle back, like Larry said, that do not get answered. A Q&A will be available via email and register participants on the Ark of Weld County's website as well. So at this time, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our panelists. Take it away. I believe Jennifer's up first.
Thank you, Mike. Hi, I'm Jennifer Levin. I'm with Disability Law Colorado. And for those of you not familiar with Disability Law Colorado, it is a protection and advocacy agency. So what that means is it's Colorado's state mandated agency that protects the rights of people with disabilities in situations involving discrimination because of that person's disability. And that includes education. So I'm the education team leader at the organization. And if you were to call us and you had an issue with your child's educational rights, you would most likely talk to me or one of my team members about that situation. And sometimes we'll take on something. Normally it would have to be a systemic issue for us to take a case, but there are quite a few that we have done in the past that we take on for individual representation. So like Larry and Mike both just mentioned, if you have an individual situation that doesn't get answered tonight, please feel free to call our organization and we'll be happy to talk to you about that.
Perfect. Thanks, Jennifer. Jocelyn?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jocelyn Walters, and I am the Special Education Director for Centennial BOCES. And Centennial BOCES serves a total of 10 rural school districts located in both Weld County and Morgan County. We do not serve all of the districts in those counties, but the majority of the rural counties. So I'm happy to be here tonight, and thank you guys so much for joining us this evening.
Right. Thank you, Jocelyn. Candace.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel discussion tonight. I am Candace Hawkins. I'm from the Colorado Department of Education, and I am the Director of General Supervision and Monitoring. I think for purposes of this discussion, what's probably most important is that I oversee the dispute resolution system, which includes due process, state complaints, and mediation at the department. And I'm mainly going to be speaking tonight about guidance and recommendations that the Colorado Department of Education has issued to try to help navigate this very challenging time. And all of that is also based on guidance that has been issued from the U.S. Department of Education. And again, I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Thank you, Candace. Letitia.
Good evening. I'm Letitia Arguello, and I'm the Advocacy Coordinator for the Ark of Weld County. If you're not familiar with us, we're a nonprofit organization that's funded by the Ark thrift stores. So when folks shop and donate there, it allows us to provide individual advocacy as well as training such as this evening for free of charge to families. So a little bit about individual advocacy is that we're non-attorney advocates, but what we can do is work as part of a team to address issues and concerns, to navigate systems that can be overwhelming and confusing, as well as connect folks to existing resources within their communities. So if you're interested in learning more about individual advocacy or our programs, you can find us at arkofweldcounty.org, and it's also in the chat box.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Letitia. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Tom Gribble.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Tom Gribble. I'm Director of Special Education and Health Services for the Greeley-Evan School District. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Larry, and the staff at the Ark for making this possible. You guys are a great resource for Colorado. And again, I'm thankful to be part of this today.
All right. Thanks a lot, Tom. All right. Next up is our PowerPoint presentation by Jennifer and Candace. Take it away.
All right, so I'm going to try to disappoint Tom in not failing with sharing my screen and getting the PowerPoint up. Tom has seen me
No pressure,
with technology before. All right, does this show up now?
Not yet. I can be your backup, Candy, if it doesn't work.
Okay, let's see. All right. So if I go slideshow, we should be good. Or are we good?
Well, you got to share. Did you hit share screen?
Oh my goodness. Yes.
Yeah.
I am seriously, I'm really going to, let's see. Let's try this again. Sorry for the technical difficulties here.
Should be that green button down at the bottom.
Yeah, I do. And
Yep.
now I can't find my PowerPoint is the problem.
Oh, wow.
It's uploaded. So, but all I'm seeing is like my mailbox. Share. Nope, I don't want to share my mailbox. Okay, but that's my, oh, there. Now do we got it?
Well, we got your Zoom invite.
Letitia, you might have to help me.
Oh, you want me to do it?
This is ridiculous. I'm so sorry, you guys. I'm totally, you know, Tom has rescued me in the past when I have technology failure.
Jennifer, if you have it up, would you go ahead and share
I think
yours?
I do. Yeah.
And that way
Hold
you
on.
guys can tag team it.
So then I guess, Candy, you might have to stop sharing before I can share, right?
All right. Where did I lose my control?
Okay, let's see.
You should be good now, Jennifer.
Okay. Hold up, y'all. I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna have to open it up.
Attorneys do this.
I'll find it.
I have it pulled up. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up.
Oh, you got it. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Letitia, you did that?
I sure did. You just let me know when you want me to click through.
It was not me. All right. Thank you so much. And again, I really apologize. So let's start here. What, of course, everybody recognizes, I think, tonight is that IDEA, the Individual Disabilities Education Act that governs the rights of our kiddos with disabilities, did not contemplate a 100-year pandemic. And so I like to kind of just ground us a little bit in what we know and what the challenge is. And really the challenge is that civil rights law meets life-threatening virus. I mean, that really is the reality that we're navigating right now. So what we do know, and it's clear from the Department of Education, is that IDEA eligible kids are entitled to a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. That has not changed with the pandemic. We also know that there have been no waivers for what are the fundamental kind of rights of kids with disabilities that is provided by IDEA. What we also know, and I think this is really critical before I get into, you know, kind of the pandemic piece, is that OSEP has told us that ensuring compliance with IDEA, in other words, following all the requirements in IDEA that are meant to advance a child's education, those are possible during the pandemic. And so ensuring compliance with IDEA should not prevent schools from offering education programs through distance instruction. Again, that is based on some guidance that came out from OSEP in March. So right as things were changing and many, and if not most schools were suspending in-person instruction due to the pandemic. So we know that the civil rights law applies. We know that IDEA is in full force and effect, and our children are entitled to the things that come with IDEA. But what we also know is that things are a little bit different because the pandemic really has threatened health and safety. So what we also know from the guidance that came out from the U.S. Department of Education early in March is that health and safety of students and of staff and of community are the first considerations. And I think it's important for us to remember that if they're not the second, the third, or the fourth, what we know from OSEP is health and safety is the absolute first consideration. We also know that FAPE has to be then provided consistent with the need to protect health and safety. And so because of that, what we anticipate and what we probably discovered in March, and many of you may have experienced, is that, you know, exceptional circumstances, and again, that protection of health and safety first, may affect how educational and related services and supports are provided. Okay, go ahead, Letitia. All right, so this is what's, I think, super challenging for everybody right now, is that at the same time that nothing has changed, right? The law and the protections that are available have not changed, but everything's a little bit different. And so what Larry talked about when we started, and what I'm gonna hit on, is that communication is absolutely critical. So what we've had to come up with, because again, I mentioned that IDEA doesn't contemplate where we're at right now, right? It doesn't contemplate this pandemic. So because the law doesn't consider these things, we've kind of had to make some stuff up. And I say that, you know, making stuff up because it's not part of the statute, right? It's not part of IDEA. And these two things are what Jennifer and I are going to be talking with you about tonight. That's contingency learning plans and then COVID compensatory services. And again, these things, because they're not actually in IDEA, what I'm going to be talking about are recommendations that the CDE is making regarding these two ways to maybe bridge, again, the gap between what the law requires and what may be happening as we protect health and safety. Okay. All right. So all of the CDE guidance related to compensatory services and also to contingency learning plans are grounded in the key principles that Secretary DeVos talked about in her April 27th report to Congress. And I don't usually typically like read alouds, but I'm actually going to go through each one of these because I think they're critical into how we move forward. You know, especially in those circumstances where, you know, we're trying to figure out, you know, what is going to be best and possible for our kids with disabilities. And these principles, I think, offer a lot of really critical guidance as we make these individual decisions about kids. So number one, schools can and must provide education to all students, including children with disabilities. The health and safety of children, students, educators, and service providers must be the first consideration. And I know you've already heard that twice or three times, and you're probably going to hear it again from me as we move forward with our presentation. Again, the needs and the best interests of individual students, not the system, should guide decisions and expenditures. Parents or recipients of services must be informed of and involved in decisions relating to the provision of services. Again, that goes back to what Larry was talking about, how communication has always been important. I can tell you as somebody who's been involved in special education dispute resolution for going on 10 years now, communication, communication, communication. And number five, services typically provided in person may now need to be provided through alternative methods, requiring creative and innovative approaches. So again, this comes from the Secretary of Education's report to Congress. And again, it really are the grounding principles and the guidance that CDE has issued about contingency learning plans and about compensatory services. Okay. And then here, I'm just going to break it down a little bit. It's the same key principles talking that Secretary DeVos talked about, but just kind of breaking it down into how they might apply on daily decision making for our kids with disabilities right now. Number one, key, we have to provide access to education for all students. We need to protect health and safety. We need to meet the needs and interests of individual students, and that's in all caps for a reason. Because again, that goes back to how it's the system, it's not the system, but it's the individual student needs that are going to drive decision making right now. And again, that's nothing different from what IDEA is all about anyway, right? In IDEA is about individual students. Number four is the involve and inform parents. And then we have to be creative, flexible, and innovative in providing service. And fortunately, special educators are really good at that. All right, Jennifer, I think you're up.
All right, so Fortunately, this PowerPoint was written by Candace. I have to give her credit. And it does speak for, I mean, you have all the information you're probably going to need in these slides. They are very informative. So basically, I'll kind of like read out loud what they're saying, but maybe add a little bit of like a twist of like maybe my opinion on it. And then of course I want Candy to chime in too, because I know she had probably some ideas behind what she was writing as well that I might not hit on. So first we're going to talk a little bit about what is a contingency learning plan. Not everybody's getting those. You don't have to get them. It was a federal actually idea. It came down from the feds. And we are fortunate enough that our state Department of Education has adopted that, because I think it is a very progressive way to kind of look at how to handle this pandemic. I think districts and parents both benefit from having a contingency learning plan. But like I said, it's not a law that you have to have it, but it is in the federal guidelines or their guidance to the states on what to do. It's a temporary plan, and it could be also called other things. You might hear it called like a remote learning plan or something like that, just so you know. A temporary plan to address changes caused by health and safety restrictions to help ensure FAPE. The plan should provide the special education and related services identified on the student's IEP. And here's that awesome language that came down from the feds that Candace and her team adopted, to the greatest extent practicable. I think that language right there, if you come away from here memorizing anything, I would just memorize that and just say, okay, how can we make this plan meet the FAPE standard to the greatest extent practicable? It should provide continued access to the general education curriculum. So, you know, let's be as inclusive as possible, right? Provide continued access to the general education, oh, I'm sorry, I just said that. Prioritize, identify those services most likely to enable the student to make progress on their IEP goals. So I think I'm good on the next slide, or the next one. So why should we develop a contingency learning plan, or remote plan, whatever you want to call it? Well, it helps give people some stability, right? Purposely, proactively navigate the evolving and uncertain nature of the pandemic. And that is what, when I get a call right now from a parent, I think they're just feeling extremely unsettled, uncertain, and just uncomfortable with what's going on. These plans can help provide that sense of certainty. And we all, I know I like to have my routines, and we all want to have some kind of routine to fall back on whenever we're feeling a little insecure about what's happening, right? So I think this is a perfect way to provide that for a student, for a family, and for the district, the IEP team as a whole. It ensures access and continuity to education in the event of disruption, which, as we all know, is happening sometimes more than others. Some districts have more disruption than others, and we don't know what's happening tomorrow, right? Most districts are sort of just on call, like it could happen any day. We're going back to online learning, and then if that happens, you're going to have this plan you can fall back on, right? And you won't feel like you may have felt back in the spring that we all felt, just like, what are we supposed to do now? It involves and informs parents. Going back to that that communication piece that we were talking about, that Larry talked about at the beginning, and that Candace is talking about. Communication is key for this whole thing to work. It ensures decision-making is based on the needs and best interest of individual students. And we will definitely focus on that word individual here today. We'll talk about that and how important it is that it must look like an individualized plan. Even though it is a contingency plan, it still must be an individualized. It ensures FAPE is provided, again, to the greatest extent practicable. And then it'll mitigate the need for compensatory services, which Candace mentioned is one of those two things we're going to discuss. In mitigating that need for compensatory services, I think, should be what everybody is sort of aiming for. We don't want gaps, and we don't, and this, the parents, the student, the school district, nobody really wants to have to go back and make up for stuff. So having one of these plans in place is going to help mitigate that, right? Because it's going to be a burden not only on districts as far as resources go, right? We don't want to have to like dig deep into the deep pockets of the school districts, which we all know are underfunded. We want to be sure and do the best we can now so that that doesn't become a reality. And then again, students don't want to have to like have double the amount of school added to their day. That's also not a very practical way to exist. So considerations for developing a learning contingency plan. What circumstances would trigger implementation of the contingency learning plan? Well, I think we kind of know what that is, right? That's going to be what's happening now. The potential that we go to hybrid or full remote learning. You just want to make sure you have this plan to fall back on when that happens. And as we know, it will most likely continue to happen for a while. What circumstances would trigger a return to the services identified in the IEP? And Candy, maybe you might want to chime in on this too. My thoughts were for this question, going back to brick and mortar buildings, right? Once you're back in school, those IEP services could be most likely implemented the way they were intended. Did you have any other ideas for that question?
No, and I think what's important though is that, you know, whatever the plan is, whatever is, you know, the team agrees to, is that these kinds of things are in the plan. So again, nobody's surprised, right? I mean, that's the benefit, or one of the huge benefits that Jennifer was talking about in having this plan in place, is that when these triggering circumstances happen, everybody knows what to expect.
Right. And oh, this is a good one. What successes and challenges did the student experience during the 2020 closures? So in the spring, I think we all saw how our kids reacted, right? And I think that's going to be extremely important information when you go to develop a plan like this. You want to mention, well, my kid just couldn't sit still in front of a computer for that long. What can we do to support him or her? We need to think about maybe potentially even more in person, even if the district is on a remote learning lockdown, there are still ways to support that student in an extreme situation. I'm not saying every student needs in-person, you know, even during a pandemic, but there are some situations where students are impacted to the point where only that one-on-one in-person instruction could work. And there are ways for districts to sort of work around that situation. You can reach out to private therapists that will still work in person even during a situation where it's in a lockdown for the school district, but maybe not that the agency that the private therapist works for. So you could think outside the box for those challenges that you experienced in the spring and maybe even still be experiencing now. So which IEP goals are the highest priority? That's obviously you're going to want to look at things that you want to focus on. The team wants to figure out what are the highest priorities, what do we want to put our resources into right now in these contingency plans, because again, it goes back to we don't want to see a lot of gaps, right, in learning, because those gaps are going to have to be filled, and that's going to be a burden on everybody in the end. I mean, it's going to be a burden on the student, the district, families trying to deal with that. So prioritize and put those energies and resources into those higher priority goals. What services can be provided remotely and are most likely to ensure progress on the IEP goals that have been identified as high priority? So again, you would just the individual cases need to be looked at. What can be done remotely that the student might actually make progress on? And I think I did come up with some ideas of like what I was thinking of that would look like, such as things like the speech therapy, maybe that could be done more so remotely, whereas occupational therapy or things like physical therapy, you may have to wait and do when you're in an in-person learning situation. So you just kind of have to prioritize how your child and how your student learns. So I think we can go to the next one. So what supports and training might parents need in order to access or use technology? So the IDEA does have regulations that require districts to offer training for parents to help implement IEPs. If a parent needs training to access technology, then feel free to ask for that from your IEP team. Figure out a way to implement that into the IEP, that you get that training that you need so that you can work with your child and understand how your child's disability impacts learning in the remote and home environment. A way to do that, if you're not sure how to figure that out as a parent, you can request an assistive technology evaluation, and a team can evaluate the student and see what kinds of assistive technology equipment or training they might need in order for them to be able to work remotely and still make progress towards their goals. Provide positive behavioral intervention and supports when appropriate. That's a really interesting one too. I think that's important as well. Even during remote learning, children still need to get that positive reinforcement. As a matter of fact, I was reading a decision that came out of CDE today. Candy might be familiar with it. And I noticed that the complaint officer pointed out that the IEP team had involved the student in remote learning by having them do a lot of the responding with the reactions button on the Zoom screen, which you can do, which I do sometimes. I'm not really that into it, but I could imagine children might like hitting the clapping button or the thumbs up button, things like that, to like reinforce them and keep them focused and keep behaviors, possibly at bay, and not is just, if they're being disruptive, hopefully that would eliminate any kind of disruptive behaviors because they're a little bit more engaged by using, being more physical with the computer. So I don't know, I just thought that was a really cute idea. And I was like, I would never think of that. I'm not an educator, so I thought that was cool. And then of course, monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of the contingency learning plan. That's a really important piece to, just keep an eye on whether or not things are working out, right? Like you can tell, as educators can tell if the student is receptive to what's going on. Parents obviously can tell if it's working, and take notes and bring it to your team. And I'm sure the team will have the educators will have notes as well. So you can discuss what to do to maybe hopefully change the situation if it's not working, or keep using whatever is working. And Candy, please feel free to jump in if I'm not hitting anything that you were thinking when you wrote these. Okay. So how will progress on the IEP goals be collected and evaluated? Well, that's an interesting one, because I know that educators are definitely well versed in how to do that sort of thing, right? Y'all know how to collect data. Parents, not probably, that would be one of those things they might get training on how to do. Collect data on what the student is doing as far as making progress in the remote situation. And I can't remember if we've already provided some of these resources, but Disability Law Colorado did make a data collection log sheet to share with parents. So if anyone is interested in something like that to sort of help you keep track of data, it's a good way to kind of dive into that. How will the provision of services be documented? That again can be something that educators can do, but parents as well when they're at home with their student to keep track of what's going on and how the student is responding to the services. How will the school communicate with parents to evaluate effectiveness of the plan and respond to the parent and student concerns? So again, communication, I think depending on the student's individual needs, because it's all individualized, come up with a plan on when to communicate with parents. And parents, obviously you communicate to the team how often you would like to be contacted and what kind of updates you would like to receive and how you would like to receive them. I mean, I know me personally, I don't want to get a whole bunch of emails from the school, not necessarily because I don't care about what my students is doing, but I just, I can get a little overwhelmed and then eventually I ignore them. So maybe just kind of depending on what your limit is and what you feel your kid needs, obviously for that kind of contact, you just want to make it clear to the school how you would like to be contacted and how often. And then when should the contingency plan be developed? So, and is this this might be Candy's slide. Did I go over my slides, Candy?
Doesn't matter. Do you want me to take it?
Yeah, you go.
Okay. So, because again, this is not something that's required by IDEA, what CDE is recommending is that when upcoming annual IEP meetings happen, particularly those in the fall, is that that's an opportunity to have a conversation about a contingency learning plan and for the team to determine if that's something that they would like to do. And again, I feel like a little bit of a broken record, but because IDEA doesn't require these, and these are just recommendations from CDE, certainly at any time, I think a parent could raise the question, like, I would like to, talk about this, because I think it might be helpful. Again, because IDEA doesn't require it, the district wouldn't be required to develop such a plan, but certainly we're recommending conversations like this because we really do think it would benefit students and educators and families all at one, because again, you have a better idea of what to expect and there's real intentional planning about services that are going to meet the individualized needs of the student. So again, that's our recommendation, is that you do it as the annual comes up. But we're also recommending that you prioritize this kind of a conversation for kids that couldn't access or benefit from remote instruction when things kind of shut down unexpectedly in March. And so you can do this the IEP meeting, or you can also do it through the IEP amendment. Okay, go ahead. And then, these are our recommendations for key areas of the IEP that may change based on, remote instruction or a distance learning plan. And so, again, it may not be relevant for every student, but these are the areas of the IEP that CDE is recommending that teams consider and take a look at. So we know that the present levels of academic and functional performance are part of the IEP. But for a particular student, that might look a little bit differently in the remote or home environment than it does in the classroom. In other words, a disability might show up a little bit differently in those two environments. And so that's one of the considerations. Same thing with annual goals. There might be annual goals that are just really not workable in the remote environment or need to be kind of tweaked a little bit in order for it to work again in the remote or home environment. Same thing is true with the service delivery statement, accommodations, the secondary transition services, particularly since those often happen in the community. Does that need to be, tweaked a little bit so that the student can continue to work on that plan? And then of course, progress monitoring. Jennifer already talked about how that is going to look a little bit different. And parents may need some additional training and some flexibility in how we monitor progress on IEP goals. Okay. All right. And so this is another piece. Again, Larry started us with how important communication is. And I said we're going to probably hit on it numerous times, Jennifer and I. So this is one of those times where changes in services must be communicated to parents. Of course, parents should be involved in determining these changes in the first place, but then they really need to have these communicated. The two vehicles that we already have in IDEA for communicating changes or refusals to make changes, the same is true, is the prior written notice and also the IEP amendment or the IEP itself. All right, and then here I'm going to just hit on progress monitoring a little bit, and I'm going to do somewhat of a read aloud because I don't want to miss anything here. We know the IDEA requires progress monitoring. And so, like I said, when we started, nothing has changed as far as what IDEA requires. This is really one of those linchpins on ensuring progress. So IDEA doesn't promise an outcome for a particular student, but it does promise progress. And so progress monitoring is just one of those really essential things that we know is a little bit more challenging right now, but still needs to happen. And so schools should make a reasonable and good faith effort to continue to collect and report progress on IEP goals, consistent with the schedule that's identified in the student's IEP. Provide periodic reports to parents, or providing these periodic reports to parents ensures they are informed of their child's progress and then can meaningfully participate in IEP team decisions about their child's education program. And we talked a little bit about, again, how communication is so critical. And so if we are using a contingency learning plan and it's not working, these are one of the things that we should be paying attention to, and then having a conversation about what needs to change, what's not working. Parents and other IEP team members should collaborate and partner to identify flexible data collection strategies that can be used to track progress. Again, we are navigating such difficult and challenging times that one of the keys is being flexible and creative and innovative in how we keep track of how well or not well a student is doing. And then, of course, this information is going to feed into a decision about whether or not a child may need some additional services to, catch up, because the disruption to their education and, again, mainly the suspension of in-person instruction left them behind. And so we need to try to provide the services to catch them back up. Okay. And so compensatory services is something that in the March guidance from the U.S. Department of Education, they referenced it might be necessary. Traditionally, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds, when we think about compensatory services, we think about a judge or a state complaints officer ordering additional services because the district didn't do what it should have done, right? And the student didn't make progress that they should have made because of that. So it's really a remedy that addresses something that went wrong. In this context, though, and this is what is really challenging, it's the virus. It's not that schools aren't, serving kids or did not follow, IDEA the way they should have. We could be looking at children who need additional services simply because the disruption to their education, the changes that had to be made to protect health and safety made it difficult or impossible for them to make progress on their goals. And so, what we do know, again, we hit on, is that FAPE has to be provided consistent with the need to protect health and safety. And that might mean for some kids, they are going to need additional services in order to catch back up. I should hit on this bottom piece before we move on. This is, again, an individualized determination. So not all kids are going to need compensatory services. Some kids are going to do fine. And in fact, I have a nephew who seems to be really thriving in remote instruction, and he has a disability, and he's just, this is his jam. So, but that's not going to be the case for all kids, clearly. And so these have to be individualized determinations. Okay. And then, am I on this one too, Jennifer? I can't get the slide.
I think so.
Okay, I'll go. These are the kinds of things that we think are going to be relevant in determining the needs of compensatory services related to COVID. And these should be made by the IEP team. So that's the other really big difference between how those of us who are familiar with this term think about it. It's really the IEP team that should be coming up and determining whether or not compensatory services are needed, and not, an SEO or an ALJ. Of course, that might happen, but it's really, this is IEP teamwork. And so these are some factors we think are going to be important for the team to consider. And that's the rate of progress on goals prior to the closure or disruption. The difference between progress monitoring data, it was like immediately that happened before the closure or the disruption to in-person instruction, and then what did progress look like a reasonable time after we returned to in-person instruction. The difference between services identified on the IEP and the services that were offered during the closure, and that includes amount, frequency, duration, and the type of services. Accessibility of the services offered during closure and disruption. And then another piece is going to be changes to the general education curriculum, because some schools, and this happened in March, actually kind of had to make changes to what they were providing to all students, including students with disabilities. And so that's another factor that we expect will be considered. And then, of course, and this is really important for tonight, input and information from parents concerning how your child did during this time. Okay.
Okay, so I guess this is my slide, and I think it's maybe one of the last ones. So I got off easy on this one. So determining the amount of compensatory services. And I love that Candy has up here qualitative versus quantitative approach. So quality versus quantity. So there's been a lot of litigation over this. Do you get minute by minute compensatory services based on just the fact that so many minutes were not delivered? Or is it an overall decision on, just overall, what does the student need? It's not set in stone, basically. It could be minute by minute. We've seen decisions like that come down. And then basically what it would say is you get the 4 hours of speech therapy that you didn't get during this closure or whatever was going on. Or whatever happened, you didn't get 4 hours. So that's your award will be the 4 hours of compensatory speech services. Or it could be, and I tend to do this more in situations where we're mediating, rather than doing that minute by minute compensatory service discussion. I like to think more about a quantitative approach, where let's think about what would the student enjoy? Not quantitative, qualitative. I get those two mixed up, sorry. So the quality, okay? So what would a student enjoy rather than 5 hours of tutoring or in math every week on top of a school day that they're already doing? Maybe let's think about a 5-day, 1 hour a day horse therapy camp after school. That would probably be something a kid would rather do and get maybe a little bit more out of, especially if the services were meant to maybe increase social skills, or even, I would even say speech therapy could be that, if the student's speech therapy is revolving around communicating with their peers. Sometimes these camps can provide that, and it is actually a fun experience for the students, so that's not something they dread doing and maybe they won't get anything out of it. So I always suggest to parents, like, go back to your IEP team and maybe talk about those kind of outside the boxes ideas. But then sometimes some people think, no, my kid really needs more math. They weren't able to pass Algebra 2, and they're going to need that tutoring in order to get that credit for their degree. Just depends on what the student really needs and can handle. Services should be sufficient to allow the student to recoup lost skills and continue to make progress on IEP goals. So that, of course, is definitely something you take into consideration. And services should include creative and innovative ways to address regression or loss of skills that account for students' individual circumstances, including strengths and impact of disability on learning and stamina. And again, that word individualized is so important. So just, you have to take into consideration all of these things. And nothing works here that looks like a cookie cutter program. So whether we're talking contingency plans or compensatory plans, if it looks like a plan that everyone is having or getting, I would be very critical of that. Like, maybe think about whether or not that's something your kid really can or really needs, and just try to kind of come up with other ideas if that doesn't sound right to you, because that shouldn't be how either one of these issues is addressed. Not cookie cutter or any kind of plan that's just basically take it or leave it, kind of an attitude. So I guess that's, oh yeah, and then one last slide. So when should these compensatory services be determined? So it says when things return to normal. I don't know when that's going to happen. And like I mentioned earlier, I would suggest if it looks like you're already determining based on all the progress monitoring and the collection of data, if you're already seeing some significant gaps, I would start having those discussions, so that it's not like a whole year's worth of education you're going to need to make up, right? So let's talk about it before it gets to be too big of a burden on everybody. And I would like to see what Candy has to say about that too, because
I would agree with you, Jennifer. We've seen other states do some different things and try to draw that hard line. What we're recommending is very similar to what Jennifer said. We don't even know when normal is going to return. So paying attention to those children are not, progressing or have, significantly regressed, and trying to address that now rather than waiting until everything is back to normal, because they're going to lose so much more. And also, what Jennifer was talking about, they may not be able to tolerate really, compensatory services. And so trying to deal with that and to prevent the need for that to the best that you can now for those children is definitely the best approach.
so I think we're at the end of our show, right?
Perfect. Hey, thank you both, Candy and Jennifer, for the presentation. That was a lot of content there and information. Thank you both, really. Next, we have a few pre-submitted questions and topics we have for discussion. These questions are, again, for any of our panelists to answer. So panelists, if you could unmute and jump in and answer some of these as appropriate, that would be great. All right, question/topic number 1. My IEP team is offering the same remote learning plan to all students with disabilities, and my child is not able to access their education without additional supports.
So that's a question we were receiving quite a few of at the beginning of this year. And again, I think, I just said no cookie cutter plans for kids with disabilities. Obviously, it's individualized. Even kids on 504 plans need to have that individualized consideration.
Got it. Anybody else? Anything to add on this topic?
I will just mention that that we continue to have the I in the IEP, to be individualized. And that is at least an expectation that I know that we're communicating as special education directors. And that ultimately each student also responded differently last spring when they were receiving services at home, and that information will also be taken into account with the services that they need. I will say that what we've noted quite a bit on is needing to really actually look at the accommodations and how the accommodations might actually change rather than services, just because of that online learning. And so that might be, you know, another thing to think about or make sure your team is talking about, along with those contingency learning plans of services when you're having those discussions in your IEP meetings.
Perfect. Thank you, Jocelyn. Next topic, my IEP team has requested a waiver for all compensatory services claims for the spring of 2020 before they will implement a new IEP for the current year.
No, you can't do that. And fortunately, we haven't received any. We did receive one complaint at the beginning of this school year about that, but not since then, fortunately.
And the Office of Civil Rights recently came out with some guidance that answers this directly and says, yeah, you can't do that.
Right. Enough said on that. Sounds like. All right, next one, disciplinary measures through remote learning based on such things as certain toys that are in view, attire being worn by the student, toy guns on display, and not attending class.
I guess I'll jump in and ask for help from the rest of the team members. You know, certainly I do believe that the student handbook is still at play. And so when we're talking about dress code and dress attire, those expectations are going to stay in place. There are also expectations of attendance. And so we still are under compulsory attendance laws. And so districts are still looking at how do we keep students engaged, and we do have a responsibility as educators to ensure that students are accessing their education. And so they will be looking at, you know, coming up with plans or contracts with families to work towards having those students log on, sign on, accessing their education. Also, I will say, you know, problem solving around internet access, problem solving around technology issues and what we need to do with that to encourage that participation in school. But certainly, yes, those that student behavior guidelines within the district's handbook or school handbook is still at play, even when a student is online.
And excuse me, and I would add that I would expect schools and building administrators to be reasonable and think about if these types of behaviors were a challenge in the in-person setting, that we would work to kind of change those behaviors and not jump to a disciplinary action right away. And I think we also need to be aware and sensitive and appreciate that we are seen inside of families' homes, right? Like they are seen in portions of my homes. And Candace, thank you. We got the memo about bring your plants to work day. So thanks for doing that. But I think we just need to be like, we communicate. Like sometimes, I'll be honest with you, sometimes our staff don't know what's behind them, right? They're not paying attention to that. And then sometimes we have 3 or 4 students online in the same space. And so we just need to be flexible and understanding and do our best to support them in their learning, but not to jump to discipline right away when those things happen.
And I like both of y'all's answers, because we have had those issues pop up too, not just in Colorado, but nationwide. It's been a concern where kids, well, actually this did happen, and I'm sure y'all all heard it on the news, where a student in Colorado Springs had a toy gun and the police came to his house and it made national news. And so I mean, what y'all are saying makes a lot of sense to me. That's what I would hope the district would do, would be to be a little bit more proactive in trying to figure out how to work with the family on issues of not accessing, maybe potentially not being able to access remotely, or not having the support they need to get the kid to go do the computer, sit in front of the computer, whatever's going on. But yeah, like I think going down that disciplinary route, once again, you know, kind of pushes those kids with disabilities into that situation where discipline is being used to send them down that pipeline to prison that we have all heard of, where it does significantly impact students with disabilities, particularly students of color who have disabilities. And so we have had a nationwide, I guess, alert to that happening with this remote learning.
Perfect. Anybody else? Thank you so much. Next one, how can families prepare for remote learning in case the schools are shut down due to COVID spikes? Jocelyn's smiling. She wants to jump in. I see it. Anything else they can do to prepare?
You know, I'm just going to mention this. One building out of however many buildings I serve, just this week said that they were sending home schedules with students to families, just in case we went back to remote, that every single student in the entire building had a schedule. And along those schedules, and instead of like the classroom number, it was the link of where students would be going to log in for their classroom. And I just thought that that would be really helpful to parents. Like, talk about like knowing what a routine needs to be, right? So that you're able to set up your routine within your home. To think about, you know, not only that routine, but then the place of where students might actually be able to learn, that's maybe more free of distractions, if that's possible, you know, because it is so challenging. And, you know, if you have multiple students in your home, you know, I just can't imagine the space that, you know, would necessarily be needed for them and their technology and all that they're doing. But those would probably, I guess, to me, just immediately kind of be the main thing, is just know what is the routine, what is the schedule going to be when you're at home, where and how are we going to set up a learning environment. And I will say, within your routines, just to make sure you have breaks and fun times and go outside and get a breath of fresh air and stretch. Play. And then again, certainly working with your IEP team, as of what Candace and Jennifer were talking about earlier, about what are those services, what are those accommodations, what might be those change in goals that we're going to attend to during those times that we're remote.
In addition to what Jocelyn said, I think just communicating to your team what you need, because it's challenging for all of us. We're all learning these virtual platforms and have computer issues and speaker issues. So just letting them know, you know, I need help understanding how to even download Zoom or get logged on. So just being transparent about what those needs are, because we're all at different levels of technical understanding. So just letting them know up front what they need. I found that families get overwhelmed, and it's emotional and it's frustrating. Not only do you have the kids home, but you have other stuff to do, and now you have to figure out how to use Zoom and how to use this separate room and all these things. So just not beating yourself up and communicating what you need to be successful too.
Perfect. Thank you, Jocelyn and Letitia. Go ahead, Tom.
Mike, I'll add, you know, like Jocelyn mentioned, like to the best of our ability, we love to kind of maximize the time that we have, if we have in-person time right now, and to do what she just said as far as like practicing. There are some schools that we have too that are, while we're in person, we are playing like we are remote, and we are helping kids who need lots of repetition review to access the online tools. And there's not just one, there's multiple systems. And just, we're helping, to the best of our ability, students be ready to go. And, we don't know the day or the hour that there might be a change, but we need to, again, maximize the time that we do have with kids right now. And the idea of reviewing IEPs, maybe you do have a contingency plan, maybe we haven't even thought about that. But if there's a parent on the call right now, and I would encourage you to, call tomorrow morning and request that meeting sooner than later, rather than waiting until after the fact that we're remote, because that just will create some additional, challenges. So kind of take advantage of the in-person time that we have and our ability to train students to access these as independently as possible.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. Appreciate you bringing that up to the group. In the interest of time, we're going to move into the Q&A session via the chat box. So I'm going to start off with the first question. And again, any of the panelists can jump in, so feel free to unmute yourself and have at it. If my kiddo doesn't get along with the primary special education teacher, do I have the right to insist that he works primarily with a different one, preferably a male?
I'll jump in and say something. I mean, we always tell parents that we do not have any legal right, to make that claim. Like, that's a personnel issue. Unless there is some, I guess if a kid had a disability where they're involving some kind of traumatic reaction to men, and it caused them to have, PTSD or something like that, that could be something maybe worked out with the team, but it's not that simple.
I see you, Jocelyn. Unmuting. Go for it.
I
No?
need to mute myself. I was just saying,
So that wasn't intentional?
I'm just saying unmute. Yikes. I mean, hard question. Certainly, yes, try to work with your teams, but overall, generally speaking, no. A parent cannot insist on a change of staff member. Those are decisions that are made by school administration. I would continue to say, work the best that you can, see if you can negotiate, look at maybe lesser time or something like that, but overall, no. A parent cannot insist on a change of staff.
And I would just add that, I would call up my local ARC advocate and have them help me think through, what is the real core issue? Is it to say, yes, men are the problem. We get that, but let's drill down a little bit deeper to figure out what's the unique need that we can kind of work through, because it might not just be as simple as the gender issue.
All right, sounds good. Thank you all. All right, next question. What if I have asked for a meeting to address this? Not too sure what this is. We'll get to it. And it still has not happened yet. We're in the second quarter now that failing grades are happening. What if I have asked for a remote plan or alteration to the IEP or a meeting to discuss different accommodations, but a meeting has not happened yet? IEP isn't due until May, is the answer I get.
So as I'm going to jump out there again, but I would ask either your special education director, if there's a special education coordinator that you work with within your schools, I would go to them and request that IEP meeting. You certainly have a right as a parent to request an IEP meeting and to be able to discuss those the current needs that your student is demonstrating, looking to problem solve of what might be some other solutions. So potentially it's your request is not getting maybe to the right person, and so maybe just look for the other person that will help support you through that.
I agree with that. And just in addition, just submitting your request in writing, whether it's snail mail or an email, just documenting that request and making sure you have that special education representative from your district attached if you're not getting a response.
All right, sounds good.
Should honor that if there's been a change in the student's circumstances. I mean, so my guess is they just haven't contacted the right person at this point.
Got it, that makes sense. Next question, if the contingency plan is already in your IEP, then do they have to do it?
I did see that question in the chat, and I will say, overall, I'm going to say yes as things change. And what what I've been learning and what I've been thinking about is that we did start creating contingency plans within my administrative unit kind of from the start of the school year, and with kind of the best of what we knew, of what we thought we knew. How does that sound? And schools have kind of changed what they were going to do. So if there was going to be a hybrid program, maybe they have shifted some grades into in-person, or they've changed with their hybrid program to different days. And so what we had put into that IEP on September 18th might have actually already changed because of what general education has done and has changed. And so this is really actually becoming really fluid, of the timing. And so that was one thing that I thought about when I saw that question in the chat box. Overall, yes, we do need to implement that contingency plan if there is a change in that learning environment for that student, as we've documented in that IEP. But I will also say we're also learning, and we are kind of changing how we're doing things when that general ed is changing. And certainly if we're not doing what we said we're going to do, talk to that special education teacher, request an IEP meeting as mentioned before, and let's just sort out kind of where we're all at again.
All right, thank you, Jocelyn. Where are we at? If it says in the IEP that you should get a progress report on IEP goals quarterly, do they still need to do it during COVID?
I think the simple answer is yes. There are some times when the in-person program is quarters, but they've bounced into a remote program that's on trimesters, and there might be those little glitches that teams can kind of figure out, but I don't believe there should be a delay, or COVID doesn't prevent us. The mail's still working, email still works, everything else works. We would still send those reports, and there shouldn't be a barrier for us to be progress monitoring and sharing that information with families.
I agree with Tom. Mm-hmm.
And I would, look at the PowerPoint too, because it has some language about making sure progress monitoring does still happen.
Perfect, thank you. I'm afraid to open this one up. It could turn into a big one, short and sweet. What exactly are compensatory services?
I'm going to say, right now, we are looking at, I'm going to say in short, we're looking at, is the student back in school as they normally were? Yes or no? So regular schedule. Second, are they below where they were performing last March before there was a school shutdown? Yes or no? Did the student participate in the services that were provided during that time of March and May? Yes or no? Based on kind of the answers to those questions, the student participated, the student is below where they were in March, they're back to school full time, they have not been able to demonstrate progress on their IEPs. We're talking about what additional services do we need to provide to catch that student back up to where they were in March. It can be a wide variety of things. of what we're doing and the ideas that we're having and what we're implementing, but it is additional services to provide students to get them back to where they were in March.
Perfect. I'm sure there's much more to that, right? But I appreciate the short answer, right? All right. Last but not least, with a quick time check, last question. What kind of changes to the IEP goals can be made as a part of the contingency plan? It can take into account needs specific to the pandemic. I'm thinking of addressing mental health needs that arise due to isolation, etc.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, I think mental health needs definitely need to be considered nowadays. I think that's a problem for a lot of students. And I encourage anyone with a student with a disability that's experiencing any kind of symptoms of mental health issues such as depression or anxiety to immediately call your team together and talk about getting some supports added to the IEP, and a contingency plan too as well. So you can have, if it has to be implemented remotely right now in your district, have it done through the contingency plan, but also consider it for your IEP as well, so it continues to be there for that student. Because we've seen quite a bit of issues involving mental health, including students taking their own lives. I've never seen as many students actually end up taking their lives since this summer began. And I'm extremely disturbed by it, to be honest.
Thanks a lot, Jennifer. Appreciate that. I'm going to shift gears real quick. Just a reminder, any questions that do not get answered during this training here, the Q&A follow-up will be available via email for all registered participants of this call on the ARC of Weld County's website, along with some helpful resources for navigating special education. All right, and also to reiterate, the recording of this training will be available as well on the website. It can also be transcribed in a variety of languages. All right, I do want to introduce Amelia Comstead. She's the Director of Development with the ARC of Weld County, and she is here to talk to us about Colorado Gives. Amelia?
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. As Mike said, my name is Amelia Kempstead. I'm the Director of Development for the ARC of Weld County. And we are excited to participate yet again in the Colorado Gives Day. It's just around the corner on December 8th. As mentioned previously, the ARC of Weld County provides advocacy and support services without cost to our families and clients. And we are able to do this through the generous support of the ARC thrift stores, but also through individual donors. So if you found today's training to be valuable, services that we've provided in the past, hope for in the future to be important, we ask that you consider to participate in Colorado Gives. Our profile will be provided in the chat box. You can click on that link. Colorado Gives accepts donations currently, or you can join us in the celebration on Tuesday, December 8th. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me as well, and I'm going to send it back to Mike. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Amelia. Obviously, we definitely support Colorado Gives. I encourage everybody here to participate as well and get the word out. In closing, I want to thank everybody on the call for their time and support tonight. Have a great rest of the afternoon or evening, sorry, and take care. Thanks, everyone.